about the idea that somehow Trump really won the election in 2020 and that there was massive voter fraud, right? And so that is simply untrue. There has been no evidence of that. Many courts have found that is not true. Courts with judges who were appointed by Republicans and judges who were appointed by Democrats. And so the perpetuation of this misleading information is a big challenge for NGOs who are working with voters to encourage them to vote and really believe in our democracy. And it has very much undermined trust in our democracy. Although I would say that recent polls do show that the vast majority of voters in our state believe that our elections are accurate. And we are very glad to see that. It is a small minority of voters who still believe that there are problems with our local elections. And fortunately, our elections are run by local officials who are accountable to their communities and who work really hard every day to make sure that our elections run smoothly and accurately. And we have many opportunities for members of the public to observe how the elections are being run. And I think that when they do that, they will see that they are being run quite well. We are very concerned that we have seen a big lie pushed around the United States that our elections are somehow not secure or are not accurate. And nothing could be farther from the truth. We know that our elections are well run. We have very strong boards of elections here in North Carolina. We work with them when they need support. And we also have a strong process of auditing. There are lots of volunteers and staff who are in each polling place to make sure that our elections are secure. And we also have a system of observers from each political party who are permitted to be inside the polling place. And those observers are able to watch and make sure that the election is carried out accurately. And so we are especially concerned with making sure that voters know why our elections are trustworthy and why they can believe the outcome of our elections when they're completed. And in addition to that, we are concerned about efforts that have been happening in our state and around the country to make it harder for voters to vote. And we're very concerned by that. This year in North Carolina, we have a new law that is new for many voters that requires photo ID to vote. And this happens in other states, and some voters are already used to this requirement, but it's a new requirement here. And so we know that many voters are anxious about how to comply with it and may feel nervous about coming to vote at all because they have to have a voter ID and they may not think that they have one. So those are the kinds of things that we are especially concerned about is new rules and new barriers that would keep someone from coming to vote. Voter ID is just fine, and some of us are concerned that voter ID creates a barrier for people who are already finding it difficult to come vote, right? So people who have very little money, voters of color, we find that those groups tend to face a greater hurdle to having their votes count and getting out to vote. And voter ID just adds another hurdle for those voters. You see polarization among voters and the public in the United States, and it's very disappointing. We see voters disagreeing and legislators disagreeing about things that should seem to be middle of the road issues, right? Basic policies to support people in our communities. And it is very disheartening for us to see this polarization. I don't think it's unique to Trump and Biden. I think it is something that has been happening in the United States for many, many years. And certainly we know that some of this is contributed. Some of what contributes to this polarization is how we access information. And greater use of social media has led to people only accessing information that they maybe already agree with. And so we have a harder time communicating about issues that we disagree about than maybe we did in the past.
From both sides.
I would say one disadvantage of our election system is that it is run by the states and run at the local level, which means that if you go to vote here in this county, it might feel different from how it feels to vote in another state. And so if someone moves around or the rules are different, you have a lot to learn. Like if you move from one state to another, if I move to Virginia, the rules are all different there. And so voters have to grapple with a lot of changes if they don't just stay in one place their whole life. So two things affect voter turnout. One is that you are not automatically registered in most states. So in North Carolina, you have to take an affirmative step in order to be registered. You have to fill out a form and mail it in, or you have to ask to be registered when you go to get a driver's license. And it can be a real barrier to just being ready to vote when voting time comes. There are deadlines you have to meet and make sure that you're registered. And you also have to update your address and make sure they know where you live so you get the right ballot, and all of that can be challenging for voters. But in addition, voting day is not a holiday like it is in other places. And so people have to find time to vote outside of their working hours, and they have to find transportation and all kinds of things. And it's not exactly designed for 100% turnout, right? It's really, the pressure is on the voter to find that time and to make it happen, and to know when the elections are coming and who's running. And so that can keep voters from turning out. And when we talk about turnout, we're talking about the turnout of registered voters, which can be different than the turnout of all the potentially eligible voters, right? Because there are plenty of eligible voters, eligible adult citizens who are not registered to vote, and they often are not even included in turnout numbers.
People can.
Well, our organization, Common Cause, has a lot of interest in reforming the Electoral College, right? There are a lot of NGOs that are concerned about the fact that someone can win the presidency without winning the public popular vote. And we know that the Electoral College was instituted at a time when there was not a desire for popular democracy to decide our president. And so it definitely discriminates against regular voters, voters from many states. Votes are frankly less powerful in the Electoral College than other votes from other states. And so there is a movement for reform of the Electoral College. It is going to take a long time. It's a hard sell in Congress, but it is something that we think is really important to the future of our democracy.
So what do you think is the solution?
Well, depending who you ask, you'll get another solution, right? There are many different proposals, but at a minimum, there needs to be a way to make sure that the popular vote is the final tally for who can become president. Forward bills to shorten the number of days that voters can vote, to make it more difficult to vote by mail, which we know harms older voters and voters with disabilities, and to make the challenge of voter ID even more difficult. And so we expect to continue to see those types of policies push forward, and we know that it will be hard to stop those kinds of policies from becoming law, as long as the party that's currently in the majority stays where it is. Sorry, microphones. I can tell you mostly about what we've seen. So our organization, Common Cause North Carolina, held a series of public town halls with members of the community all around our state. We went to more than 20 counties and had many thousands of people come out. And we created an open microphone for voters to tell their state legislators what issues matter to them. And a number of issues were right at the top. So jobs and the economy are always at the top. Education is very important, and our public schools are very important to voters. We also see voters very concerned about environmental pollution. There are some parts of the state where there is significant pollution, and voters are concerned about their health. And we also saw voters concerned about the priorities that were being set by the legislature. So in a couple of communities, some legislative leaders were pushing to open some casinos, and a lot of voters did not want gambling casinos in their community, and so they came out very strong in opposition to those. And so those are the kinds of things that people are raising, and of course they're concerned about prices and inflation and food costs and all of those things as well. You know, I think both parties refer to economic issues, you know, sort of above all, right? And then we do see some parties using topics that cause anxiety, right? So immigration, national security, and things like that, using those topics to bring out voters. But here in North Carolina, we really see a lot of discussion about schools and education, about public safety, policing and security. Those kind of things are what most politicians are talking about.
The foreign policy is on the focus of the voters or not?
You know, I think it really depends. You know, this election is going to definitely be affected by the war between Palestine and Israel, and I think that many voters are concerned about that, but it also depends on where you are, right? What we saw in Michigan with the engagement of the Arab community there is really different from what you see in North Carolina, where we have a much smaller Arab population, right? So there are pockets in certain cities where folks are very concerned about foreign policy, and then frankly, I think you know, the average American is really focused on domestic issues. One of the ways that we're trying to build trust in the elections is just to explain to voters how the elections work, because one thing that happens that many people find confusing is that we see results on election day, but those results are unofficial. They are preliminary results. The election has to be counted and audited over the next 10 to 20 days. And in North Carolina, that's how the process works. And the boards of elections work together with their staff to count all the ballots carefully, to count them again and audit them, and also to count the ballots that came in with questions attached to them. So we can cast ballots that need to be confirmed before they are counted. And so what we do is we try to make sure that we're sending out information to the media and to voters throughout that period, because people have questions about why the total tallies of the votes are changing. And that's because the work of the elections boards is happening, and they are doing the work to make sure that the count is accurate. But some people find that to be concerning, right, that they see the numbers changing. And so we have done a lot of work, and the boards of elections have done a lot of work to explain to voters what they are doing in that time, and why they might see a different number at the end when the official results come out. So that's one of the ways. And we also have a huge amount of work to do to counter misinformation. So you asked about election sabotage. And the truth is, here in North Carolina, it is impossible to cyber attack our elections because none of the voting machines are connected to the internet. All of the voting machines are self-contained, and there is a process where the data is transferred and checked that does not involve any connection to the internet. So our biggest threat here in North Carolina is misinformation, and our biggest threat of election sabotage is groups that are promoting false ideas about how our elections work. And some of those members of those groups have gotten jobs working for the boards of elections, and so we worry about what they could do from the inside. But the truth is that we are not concerned about cyber attacks. We're concerned about voters hearing things that are inaccurate about how the elections work and losing trust because of that misinformation. Well, this gets back to the polarization that you asked about earlier. So we do see polarization and a big divide between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party here in North Carolina. And unfortunately, what that means is that it's very hard to find middle ground. We have been able to make compromises, really important compromises, even just last year, on changes to election laws. And good work behind closed doors between Republicans and Democrats has been able to achieve more moderate policies when it comes to election laws. But unfortunately, we do have a legislature that is controlled by one party, and that party tends to push forward legislation that is not good for voters. And so we have seen challenges trying to make sure that voters are protected from those changes. It depends on the election. So we see a big increase in participation around presidential elections, and a decrease in the years between when we're just voting for members of Congress. and local elections. And the participation in presidential elections varies depending on how controversial the election is, how serious people feel in terms of their concern for the future of the country, and how excited they are about the candidates. And so in 2020, we saw huge participation, right? We saw upwards of 75% of registered voters participating, which is excellent for the United States. In this year, we don't know what we'll see, right? We don't know how voters will feel. There are times when voters stay home because they are not excited about their choices. And we have, I'm sure, seen reporting that some voters are not excited about their choices between Biden and Trump. But that doesn't mean that we will necessarily see low turnout. You know, we know a lot of people are concerned about the future of our country on both sides of the aisle, right? So voters from both parties and from third parties are concerned about the future of our country, and we hope that that will encourage voters to come out and vote.